I started walking when I was 2.5. It was because I was the youngest of 4. I just got my siblings to do everything for me. If I wanted to go somewhere, they would pick me up and carry me because I was obviously bossy. So I learned to delegate, or I say I was a CEO age 2.5 because I was very happy getting other people to do things for me.
Welcome to Lead From Within, the podcast for people leaders that explores the fascinating intersection of mental health, leadership and performance. Hello, I'm Dr. Nick Taylor and welcome to Lead From Within. In today's episode, I'm incredibly excited to be speaking with Lindsay Pattison, Chief People Officer at WPP. Lindsay is a widely respected leader in her industry, recognized not only for her ability to identify and nurture top talent, but also as a trusted partner to global clients. Her transition from Chief Client Officer to Chief People Officer at WPP highlights the really fascinating intrinsic link between talent and people, and ultimately how successful clients can be served and met with their needs. As Lindsay said herself, our business and our clients succeed when we have the best, most highly motivated talent. But Lindsay, you're one of these people that seems to have so many plates spinning at the same time and have more hours than the rest of us. And I know your work with WP is not the extent of your work. You also are a non-exec director for the Women's Rugby World Cup in England in 2025, which is an event I'm really excited about. And you also sit on multiple advisory boards of global and regional companies. So your reach and your impact is far and wide. But in your role at WPP, you're enabling over 115,000 people across multiple markets to really reach their full potential. I'm really excited to hear more about that. So thank you so much for joining the conversation and making time for it today. Perhaps if I could ask if you could introduce to the listeners and the viewers today a little bit about WPP just to set the scene.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm super happy to be here. I'm always embarrassed when someone introduces me. It feels like I'm looking down from above and going, oh, is that me? But I guess I'm a bit older now and I have had a career. So as you said, WPP is about 115,000 people in over 100 markets around the world. And we're essentially a marketing services company. So we have agencies like Ogilvy or VML that provide advertising services, media agencies like Group M, PR or corporate reputation agencies like Burson, design agencies like Landor, brilliant digital agencies like AKQA. So a collection of different agencies all over the world. The revenues are just under 15 billion in 2023. So it's pretty big. It's a FTSE 100 business. And I've been with WPP in various roles, most recently CPO for almost 14 years now, but different roles before then. So I sit on our ExCo, our executive committee, and report directly into Mark, our CEO. And now I'm CPO, have a lot of time with the board. So obviously part of the compensation committee, but I attend all the board meetings as well. So a very different role. And it's a great business.
I'm really excited to talk more about it. And I don't think any business gets to that scale without being complicated in its own way. But there is a uniqueness to the WP landscape, isn't there, in terms of all of those different agencies and different organizations, and really want to learn more about that in the conversation. But perhaps if I could start with you and learning a bit more about your journey, because my experience with speaking with CHROs and chief people officers is there's rarely a kind of a singular journey to get to that place, and I think one of the things that makes the role so interesting. But are you surprised to be doing what you're doing? Is it where you thought you would land? Like, how has your journey been to this point?
I am surprised. It definitely wasn't a planned journey, and I think obviously when I would say to people when they're younger, I think they look at senior people and think there was a very measured, planned, strategic career path. And often, as you will know, it's much messier than that. I think you put your hands up for opportunities and you move through. But really, I've been on the client service side for most of my life. I started out at a different agency, part of Omnicom many years ago. I went client side for a while, working for Ericsson mobile phones back in the day when Ericsson and Nokia were fighting for the number 1 and 2 status. So very different to where we are now. But it was very helpful to go and get a different perspective. Then I came back into the agency world and then kind of gradually moved through. And I think where I made a big change or a big leap, and I'm a fan of people making leaps or a fan of taking jobs that make you feel a bit anxious, is I was a managing partner at an agency in London, and there was a role a headhunter spoke to me about, which was to be CEO of a small agency and CEO within Group M, which is the media business within WPP. And I immediately thought, wow, that looks interesting, because you've got these two parent brands who can really help me do my job better. So I've never been a managing director, as my confession. I went from being a managing partner with no real responsibility to suddenly being a CEO. But it was CEO of only 30 people. So it was a very grand title. And I inherited two MDs. So I was like, my God, there's 30 of us. There's a CEO, there's two MDs, both of whom gone from my job, which was slightly awkward. But anyway, it was great to make that leap. I loved the fact I had this parent company that I could lean into and give me support. And that was a very successful period for me. Maxis UK, we went from 30 people to 350 people in about 5 years. The revenues obviously grow exponentially. And because of that, I took on a global role as well as my UK role, which was looking after product, new business, growth, marketing. And then I eventually got the global CEO role of Maxis. I ran one of our global media agencies for some time, moved into a group role as we merged, the first of the many mergers that we've done at WPP. As you said, we're a highly complex matrixed organisation because we were born of multiple M&A over the 30 years that Sir Martin Sorrell was in charge. So we started to merge businesses. So my business got merged with another. I went into a group role. And then when Mark Reed, the current CEO, took over from our founder CEO, he sort of looked at all my roles and said, it feels like you've got a lot of jobs, what job? Or I'd like you to focus on clients and growing our clients at WPP. And that was a role I had for 6 years, if you count a year under Martin Sorrell. And to be completely honest with you, I was just done in that role. It was such an amazing role, Chief Client Officer, creating a central practice, a bit like consultants do. So I'd have global client leaders looking after our top 40 or 50 clients, building a support service and structure, adding in basic people skills actually to that. Because what I inherited was a group of very senior individuals who'd been anointed by Martin with no consultation with anyone else. Some of them felt their job was to take the client to lunch. Some felt their job was to approve every single piece of marketing communication that went out and run a P&L. And there was a lot in between that. But those people weren't supported. They weren't managed. There was no discipline. There was no development, actually, or support. So that was quite a long and brilliant journey to turn that organisation into what I think is a strength for WPP. But after 5 years or 6 years of growth plans and annual appraisals, I was like, I can't do it anymore. Actually, I really, really need a change. So I started to talk to my boss about the need for a different kind of role and recognising, to be honest with you, that there may not be a role for me. There may not be an exco level role, in which case that was fine. If I could find my successor, then it was fine for me to leave. Actually, I would have been okay to leave. And then we were looking at other roles for me, making up roles, to be honest with you. Lots of weird titles that we talked about. But I'm sure I could have made a convincing fist of whatever job I got. But then my predecessor stepped down. She got an amazing job at Warner Brothers Discovery. And so my boss said, look, I was on holiday, actually. I was on a walking and hiking holiday yoga holiday and hiking holiday. And he kept phoning me, and I sort of sent him a text saying, look, I'm away this week. I'm, hiking and doing yoga. He said, it's just I want to talk to you about something before you're back. And I was like, well, okay, I'm back on Monday. So this is Wednesday. Phoned me again on Friday. I said, again, look, I'm away. I'm back Saturday night and I'll be in the office on Monday. Phone me Saturday morning. I'm like, I'm literally up a hill. I can see cows. You clearly, so if you want to talk to me, I'm going to make my most zen and my most calm and chilled, because I'll have done 5 days of hiking and yoga, albeit with your phone calls. And whatever you want to land on me, let's do it then. So he phoned me and said, blah, 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 Jen's resigned. And I don't think this is a stupid idea, and Andrew thinks it's not a stupid idea, but would you consider doing the role? And as I said, that what I felt was versus the role we were sort of making up, really, to keep me in the organisation. It made me feel excited, anxious. My stomach dropped a little, and I thought, and I said, my initial reaction was, it's not a stupid idea.
Mm-hmm. So instinctively, you kind of felt you could see how your skill set was aligned to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots I don't have. So, of course, you immediately go to, well, I don't have HR qualifications, and there's lots I don't know. But it's actually about being a leader, isn't it? And it's about having a team of people around you that can do the things that I can't do. So once I figured that out, and then I had to keep telling other people that, the chair of the board would say, well, we like Lindsay, maybe she could do a great job, but she hasn't got. And it's like, well, stop telling me what I haven't got. Why don't we focus on what I can do and bring to the business? So
that's a really interesting piece, isn't it? About how do we do our best work? And I'm a big believer that we do our best work when we're when we're able to really play to our strengths, and then fill the gaps in around us with other brilliant people whose strengths those gaps are. Can I ask you? I mean, just hearing that journey and hearing all of those roles, there's a lot of pressure and stress, I imagine, that you've had to navigate over the years. And it was really interesting hearing you talk about hiking and yoga. And how do you manage yourself? How do you manage a high pressure role? How have you managed a high, like that career trajectory without being overwhelmed by the pressure?
I think I am naturally quite resilient. And I think I'm a clever and I'm a nice person. And those words sound very basic, but I'll tell you why I think being a nice person is helpful, and it helps to be clever as well, is that I've figured out you can never do one job by yourself. It's always about surrounding yourself with a team. It's always about asking other people for help. It's always about doing favors for other people and asking other people to do favors for you. So I think surrounding yourself with a bunch of allies is really important, because sometimes you just need to check an idea because am I going mad? Other times it's like, I literally don't know what to do. You've done this before. How can you help me? I'm never afraid to ask for help, honestly. But I do it knowing that I will do my best to always give help back. So I think surrounding myself with different types of people that can help has been a key part of my success. And you do need to, I've got big shoulders because I used to be a swimmer. So you do need a few big shoulders, and you take a few deep breaths. And I've had a coach on and off for a number of years. I sometimes use her intensively when I'm going through a big period of change. So normally when I take on a new role, then I might not see her for a year and a half, 2 years, but she knows me very well. And one of the early pieces of advice, which I still give to other people that is helpful if you're in a stressful situation, is always looking at the reverse lens. So what's going on for that person or the opposite point of view in that situation. Then there's the wide lens, and forgive me because you'll know this, but the wide angled lens. So who else do I need to think about when we're making a decision or dealing with the situation? And then probably the most helpful lens is the long view lens, which is, look, how important is this going to be in 6 months' time? And so I use that technique quite often, where you take a breath, but you just start to think about different perspectives, and it helps put everything else into perspective, I think, as well. But you're right. If I know I'm getting stressed or wound up, I like to go to the gym and do weights, but actually what I've realized is I need yin, not yang, if that's right. I think I need yin yoga. I need sort of the softness and the mental discipline of something like yoga just to help balance me out. And I think the physical balancing is as important as the mental balancing, actually.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And it's about finding space and for recharging, as well as being active as well. I think both are so critical. And that piece about like being able to ask for help, have you always been able to do that, or is that a skill you learned over time? Because the reality with asking for help is often it exposes a vulnerability or exposes something that we might feel we should be able to do.
I think I've always asked for help. I think asking for help just makes you better at your job. So I know sometimes when I'd offer out coaching. I sort of have to say to people, I'm offering you a coach because a coach is just going to help you be better at your job. It's not remedial. It's not to fix a problem. It's in service of helping you do better. So that would be my mindset. And maybe that has come from, two things at a personal level. A story I realized when I was lucky enough to go on a leadership program, a very intensive leadership program, about 14 years ago, but I was quite early into WPP, and I got Martin to nominate me for this X Factor program, which was not singing and dancing. It was X Factor, as in women and X chromosome. And you had to delve into your childhood and come with research. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be absolutely awful. It was me, British, as you can tell, and 7 American women. And I just thought, I was nervous about it, but actually it was really interesting. So we had to go back and talk to your siblings and talk to your parents about some aspects of growing up. And what I learned is, in my mind, I'm a high achiever, and I'll come back to sort of why, which is the swimming part. But so I asked my mum, at what age should I start talking or walking, all of those normal things, thinking that I would be a very advanced child because I'm the youngest of 4 children. And what I learned is I didn't start. Well, if you've got kids, you've got kids.
I've got 3 kids, and I'm also one of 4 as well. So I know having 3 siblings is a reality.
What order are you? Where are you?
I'm number 2, and I'm the only boy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, in ours it's girl, boy, girl. Actually, so I'm the youngest of 4. And what age did your kids start walking? What's a good age? What's a good, if you're an achiever?
On a good day, I know what age my children are. So remembering when they started walking is a stretch for me. When did my children start walking? I actually don't know the answer to that. But I think one of them, and I can't remember which one, started quite late. And then the other 2, it was pretty normal.
Normal, yeah.
But I just can't remember that. I should know that.
Normal is before 1, right? Or around 1, because they start crawling after 6-7 months. So I started walking when I was 2.5. And I was horrified. My mum told me the story. I was like, but why? And the reason, again, I've been embarrassed saying it, but it's true, and it's probably an insight to me, was because I was the youngest of 4, I just got my siblings to do everything for me. So I would, if I wanted to go somewhere, they would pick me up and carry me, because I was obviously bossy, in inverted commas, or I'd point at something and they would go and get it for me. So I didn't have to walk, because I learned to delegate, or I say I was a CEO age 2.5, because I was very happy getting other people to do things for me, and they did, right?
I love the CEO at 2.5.
I always think people would do things for you. My husband slightly disagrees. He always thinks I'm giving him a long list, but I said that I'm inspiring him versus delegating. I'm inspiring him to sweep the balcony right now and prepare a barbecue. And then the other thing is, I think because I was quite a serious swimmer, I think that gave me a couple of things. It gave me discipline, which, and actually a lot of leaders have some sort of high-level sport in their background, but it obviously gave me coaching. So I always had a coach, and the coach was there to make you better, and you'd always ask for help, right? So I think maybe that was a contributing factor as you asked me about it.
So the sports piece I would love to come on to, because I think that there are so many parallels and benefits to thinking about how we achieve in sport into the workplace. But can I also ask you, because my understanding is you have an English literature degree, so the arts must have been a big part of your life. And what I can imagine in WPP, there's a lot of incredibly creative people, which must be wonderful to be surrounded by. But what do you think being kind of educated in the arts has brought to your view of the world of business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never been asked before. I think it's that there's no right answer, which is why some people hate arts or English, because you're making up, you're being inventive, you're being persuasive, right? You're starting an essay and you're giving your point of view. So you read and then you disseminate, you collect your thoughts and you present an argument, which is what I do every single day when I'm persuading someone to do something for me, or I'm trying to win a client. And there is never a right answer. There are multiple answers. So probably that.
I think it's very interesting to think about the history of psychology, for example, and modern day psychology was born out of mental philosophy from philosophy departments, but actually the arts, broadly speaking, have spent an awful lot of their time trying to explain the human experience one way or another. And literature is fascinating because it's really, there's a lot of psychology in literature. I mean, you just read Dostoevsky to kind of read an amazing account of madness, for example, or like, I know I'm not a great person who, I'm not terribly knowledgeable about Shakespeare, but I understand that Shakespeare is an incredible psychologist with modern day kind of eyes in lots of ways. And I wonder whether there's something inherently that you're drawn to about people and about the human experience and about what it means to be a person, and whether that feeds into your work.
I mean, probably, because when I was doing the other jobs, it was always about a team and getting my team with me at the forefront, leaning in and doing the work, like connecting and working and succeeding as a team. And so in order to do that, you need lots of different types of people, and you have to adjust and work out what's motivating for people. You have to listen and understand what's going on in people's lives, I think, in order to, and I know now we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work and understanding, but I think good leaders would have always done that. But you have to know what's going on for people outside of the day job, because in many jobs, but certainly in my job, it's not 9 to 5, and you spend a lot of time with people, and you need to understand more about them. And I've got many friends, really good friends, and I used to be their boss, and I'd be their boss either at this level or at that level, which never stopped me being a friend, because there was always a very clear line of when I was being a boss or when I was being a friend. And obviously you can be both, and sometimes you might have very different types of conversations, but actually I never had an issue with that. I think that's why Mark thought of me for this role, because he did say, but you like people, and you're good with people, was his very basic reason for why I should be CPO. But I do like people. It's very rare to find someone that I can't find any redeeming feature in. I think I'm a good judge of character, and I guess there's a challenge sometimes with that word judge, but I can judge characters. I can listen and read a room, I think, well. And what I realised in lockdown, actually, I really struggled to begin with, and it really made me realise how much energy I get from being with people. I do need to, downcharge, and often at the weekends I'll do yoga, go to the gym, just spend time with my husband, read the papers. I won't do that much because I'm so full on, and my whole job is to be an energizer, I think, of people. And I love being with people, and I think COVID, I realised, God, it was so lonely just staring at a screen. I'd go for my hourly walk, and we were allowed, and try and talk to people. Or just at least smile at people. So I think you're right, actually. Yeah, I do get I get energy from people, and I give energy. I hope to give energy.
Yeah, and that interconnectedness is so key, isn't it? It's how, and it speaks to what you've alluded to a couple of times, this team piece. It's the connection with our team, it's connection with our peers that ultimately enables us to grow or to achieve, etc. And I know in previous interviews and conversations, I've heard you talk about or challenge the notion of work-life balance as almost being kind of a misnomer. It's not a fair characterization of how we need to show up at work. And I'm interested in your view of that, and particularly in relation to what you've just shared about how we need to know our people in order to be able to understand the unique stresses and strains they have as they're showing up in work. And what is your view of work-life balance?
I think it's a myth. The challenge with the word balance is that it feels that everything's perfect and equal and well balanced, and life is much messier than that. And I think it's quite hard to compartmentalize your life. And I think maybe it's easier for me sometimes than some of my teammates or my colleagues, because I don't have, I don't have kids at home who are growing up who need full-on attention. My father's unfortunately died, but my mum is fine and in good health. I don't have parents who have challenges. So I think I almost have too much time, which is why it works so much. But I need to be very attendant to what other people's needs are, so that the right balance is how it works for some people. I always feel like mums, I'm going to be very simplistic here, have the hardest job in the world because they tend to do more at home. So they get the kids ready, the kids go to school, they come and do it full day, then they go home, get the kids, and then they tend to log back on again in the evening. So their way of coping is to compartmentalize their life, which I think is probably really challenging. And I'm not sure I don't want people to feel like they've got to do 2 hours extra work a night. There must be a better way of accommodating the work in order for them to be happy. If you're happy at work, then you're going to deliver better work. And I remember sort of talking about, again, thinking about mums coming back to the workplace. I'd rather have a brilliant woman who can do 4 hours every day, 5 days a week, or can do 3 days, versus we seem to, and I think we're much better now, but pre-COVID, we were so bad at part-time work or being derogatory about part-time work, or the old days when people would sort of roll their eyes when often it was the mum, more often than the dad, would have to leave at 4 because they had to go and do parental responsibilities, and then you knew they'd log on. So I think we're much better at that, but you just need to know what works for that person. So I think you need to understand what's going on around their life, not for you to fix everything, but for you to be accommodating and thoughtful, because you want people, I honestly believe people should be happy at work. I mean, obviously work's difficult and challenging at times and can be stressful, and there are deadlines and you're paid to do a job, right? That's why it's called work. But it should be an environment where you have teammates that you feel happy that you are succeeding and growing, because God, we spend so much time at work. So if you're not happy, that's a lot of your life you're unhappy for.
And when we are in a role that suits us and we are surrounded by people who are supporting us and we feel safe, it will elicit more positive emotions that will ultimately result in better output. So everyone wins in that scenario.
Yeah. Things like, loyalty comes. I mean, I was thinking back to an example, and I was thinking about this earlier. I can think of 2 colleagues when I was the global CEO of Maxis on my exco. So very senior colleagues, both men, actually. And one, I was thinking back to things I did that at the time you just do them because you don't think about your leadership style but now in my role, I have to think about how we set a framework and guidance for colleagues, because we have so many of them around the world, but there has to be flexibility in it. And there can only be flexibility if you know your team and you know your colleagues. And you can't do that from a mandate from on high. It has to be this manager and this manager and this manager, intimately actually knowing people. So on my exco, one of our guys, Nick, his son is severely autistic and has kidney issues and doesn't eat. I mean, very challenged, and a delightful kid, and Nick needed time off, because he was donating one of his kidneys to his son in the hope his son could, it's a big deal, right? So of course you just go have as much time as you want and you need, and the whole team rallied around, and there was no need. I didn't feel any need to go to anyone senior to say, this is what I'm doing. It's just the normal and natural thing to do. And of course, he's a wonderful colleague and we're all still in touch. And another guy, his wife was struggling to conceive and she kept going through lots of treatments, lots of natural treatments. IVF hadn't worked. And then he asked if he could go away to India for a month of natural treatments that seemed to consist, you'll know what it's, the one where they pour the oil on your head.
Yeah. Ayurvedic. Yeah, I've had that before, actually. That's an extraordinary treatment, yeah.
Well, he had it every day or twice a day for a month, because actually it was about, well, maybe there's something within, and it didn't, unfortunately that didn't work. They did. There's a happy end. They've got 2 boys to the story. They moved to Ibiza and that seemed to fix it. So, but actually just giving time off, and again, just saying, just have the time off. I mean, I don't even think I just did it as paid time off because it was the right thing to do, because I needed him to be happy and feel supported in his work. And you know what? If you've got a strong team, other people will pick up the work and you can do it. So I think you have to be accommodating and understanding within it. And it's not, I haven't thought about those 2 examples for years, actually, but I thought about them today when I was thinking about this conversation. I just think you do the right thing. And I think in a role like mine, you have to make sure that there is some flexibility to allow people to do the right thing. And I always think those weren't crises, but they were challenging, actually that's when the company should be at its best and should be at its most human and supportive.
I'm loving hearing you describe the way you lead, and so much of it is resonating with what I believe, what we believe in our mind, but also what the literature shows to be really important. And one of the real challenges when an organization scales to the level now at which WPP is how do you cascade that style of leadership? How do you ensure that all of your managers and leaders are leading in a way that is very human, that is recognizing the whole person, that is creating psychological safety, that listens well? How can we make sure the workforce of today and tomorrow is able to do that?
I think sharing, which I think leaders have got much better at, and sharing your own stories and sharing your own vulnerability is helpful. I think understanding that, people, certainly at WPP, we're a service industry, our greatest cost, but our greatest asset are our people. And if we don't have the right people in the right jobs, creating brilliant work for our clients, we don't have a business. Simple as that. It doesn't matter. We can have all the technology in the world and all the systems in the world, and we don't have enough of those, by the way. Some of the more boring HR stuff, they're pretty terrible. But if you haven't got the right people, because people win, people create great work, they win over the clients. So we have to create an environment. And I think doubling down and understanding what that means in today's world versus what it means for me as a Gen X, or I think we don't have that many boomers because actually we're still a relatively young industry in advertising. But understanding what that means now, I think is really important. And I think when I was growing up as a leader, I didn't know terms like psychological safety and bring your whole self to work. I just was trying to be a good person, right, and a nice person, and understand intuitively how you might. But I think there are things that you can do that can mean you can set a framework for, I guess we would now call it inclusivity. So how do we create a framework for inclusivity? So at WPP, we definitely use our ERGs, our employee resource groups, to good effect, I think, where they're able to help influence and shape policies and help to influence and shape events that give space. So we had something that started post-COVID called Making Space. That was a moment where across all of our campuses and offices, people will come together, and it was celebrating creativity very broadly. It was just a way, and part of the trick also to get people back to the office, of course, which we're still endeavouring to do. But we changed that now to be Making Space. We have 6 of them across the year, kind of really led by and challenged by those ERG groups that mean we have discussions about what does it mean to have a supportive and a productive work environment. So the one we have right now, started last week, is Making Space for Parents and Caregivers. So understanding that there are different needs that audience within WPP. So we've got, courses and support materials, and we allow people to take the space to go and read and spend time on all those. We provide them across our campuses. So how do you build empathy and understanding as a parent, build positive parenting skills, and then actually for people who've got older kids, when to talk about money. So very practical ways of resourcing. And actually sometimes parents or caregivers you wouldn't think of as a minority group. But actually they're people that need additional support or understanding, I think, in our industry. And then we have other ones, we have Making Space for Pride. We had a couple of months ago, Making Space for Women's Equity, again, earlier in the year. So each of the ERGs helps guide those. So I think we do it by listening to people who are passionate about that area, and then we sort of co-create with them, and then we create the environment, we put on the programs, and we encourage people. And I guess then at a very simplistic level, we need the leaders across the organization to make sure they allow people to go to those things, not just meet their deadline for the work that the client is paying for. So there are ways you can do it. But
I love that final piece there. And as you were talking, I was thinking about I was kind of thinking about how it fits into various parts of the wider topic around human performance and unleashing the human potential in the workplace. And there's definitely there's the kind of the different groups that need to be invested and involved. So the ERG groups, or the D&I as a topic. Then there's a piece around leaders and managers, and then there's also something around like how does this then all fit into a strategy? And linking to what you just finished with there is this idea, well, how do you get the manager to give permission? How do you get them to understand that this is a priority? And part of that, I think, comes back to, well, how is the strategy communicated to those leaders that actually the reason that we are giving our people these opportunities, the reason that we are creating a culture like this, the reason we believe this is important is because we believe that this gets the best out of our people, that they will be happier, they will be more likely to succeed in their life goals and therefore their personal goals, their sense of safety and identity. But I sometimes think in the world of well-being that we have forgotten to articulate clearly enough the importance of somebody's state of well-being, like how happy they are, to their output. And by failing to communicate that, some of the cynics come in and say that's a nice to have, not a need to have. And I wonder, like, do you come up against those kind of, or have you historically come up against those challenges? Do you come up against those challenges? And do you agree with the premise that health and well-being is intrinsically linked to performance?
Yes. So yes, 100%. I think you just know it at a personal level, don't you? I mean, I had a period probably 18 months ago where, as I said, I'd definitely done my role for a bit too long, and I was totally burned out. And if you experience it yourself, but you can see it in other people, I absolutely believe if you are happy in your role, if you feel like you're growing, that you're being productive, that you're getting feedback, that you have a team that supports you, that there's a high level of trust. So now, again, we call it psychological safety, but I would simplistically call it trust. I think is absolutely key to high performance. Openness, innovation, discussion. We know discussion and different ideas lead to better decisions. People can contribute, so you have a richer pool of ideas. I'll give you a small example. It's a tiny one, but because we did a People Global Town Hall last week, and I got asked a question about people coming back to the office if they're neurodiverse and how to be accommodating for them. And I knew that actually we were making some environments. There were some environmental things that we could do. So lower lighting, darker space, actually supplying noise cancelling headphones, and very practical things that we could do versus saying, what I didn't want to do is, I don't think you should give up on a group and say, well, you should just work from home because I might better, because I do believe in the power of teamwork and that environment. It's like, well, how can we bring them in, and where and how do we accommodate them? What I don't think we've done well, certainly at scale, is do an ROI on that at all. Because the concept of happiness equals top line growth is not there. And what we do know is when we're trying to save margin and we're making, that definitely causes misery. But I'm not sure we're clear enough about top line growth. Maybe we know it intuitively. I know that the best leaders have a great team and a great connection with their client, and they drive organic growth because they have high levels of trust. I know that. I'm not sure we have proved it. We do know that client satisfaction, so we measure client satisfaction through like NPS on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely to recommend. And we also can correlate that to employee satisfaction. And we do know that client satisfaction and employee satisfaction have a very high correlation. So that's one good data point. But I think we should do more. If I had a way of evaluating happy teams and financial performance, that would be better. But I know people feel motivated if they feel heard and included. So the tiny example, when I was asked about neurodiversity, it reminded me of, I had a guy that worked in my team. He didn't really report to me. And he took his son for some tests and found out that his son was neurodiverse. He had ADHD and was on the spectrum as well. And then, I've heard this happen to a few people, actually, a friend that I will see tomorrow. As the doctor was sort of describing it, the dad realised, said, "Oh, well, that's me." So I know at least 2 people that have gone with their sons and they're like, "Oh God, that's me as well." So interesting for him. So he's diagnosed, and suddenly lots of things made sense to him. Anyway, he dug into it, did lots of work, and then he wrote me a paper. And there's a there's a way of actually people with his condition understanding text, which is a way of different words not being bolded. It's a weird font that he's now trying to get Microsoft to have as standard, which would be helpful, that mean the way they read it and what jumps out on the page is different for them versus how I would read it. So he sent it to me and I did read it. It was long. But what I realized as I got to the end of it is that there was something about the communication skills. And he basically said, if he sends a message out, if he sends an email and he doesn't get a reply quite quickly, I would say within a day, then he really worries about it. And then he worries and he grows and he thinks he's done something wrong. So what I learned is whenever he sends me an email, I go back just maybe to acknowledge I've got the email safe receipt, that I'll come back to him, or ideally more. And actually I had an email from him today on a project. He was thanking me for putting him on a project where he's worked his backside off. He's been amazing on a massive pitch, but he's delighted because he feels fulfilled, he feels seen, and he wanted to share the project with me. And he's kind of like hungry for more work by just by tiny things, by him being able to articulate his need, and me listening and then just remembering a tiny thing that could make a difference. So I think that's what everybody should do as a human, right?
Yeah, I love that, and I'm dyslexic, so I spent years trying to work out how to manage that in my life, and it comes with its perks and with its disadvantages. Like I have terrible short-term memory, but I understand things quite quickly, which is it's a paradox that's quite annoying at times. But what I find really interesting about the neurodiversity topic is it's similar to, well, it is intrinsically linked, isn't it, to the DE&I topic, which is that if you have these different types of people who are looking at the same world, you'll see and hear different things. So you benefit from those different perspectives and skill sets. And but going back to the ROI topic, because it's creeping forwards in the right direction. But we know if we look at the academic literature, so if you look at the research that's coming out of Oxford and Harvard with Richard Layard and Jan de Neve, and these academics are proving that happy workers are resulting in better financial performance. But I think what hasn't happened yet is that research has been translated properly into day-to-day work within organizations. It's kind of abstract, and we can all go away and read a Deloitte report on corporate well-being.
It feels right, doesn't it? It feels instinctively right. It makes sense. That's right.
But I think what businesses need to do now is actually get to a place where they're proving it themselves as one of their key KPIs, because we need that evidence so that the business case is not tenuous, but it's concrete. And that justifies this very human-led way of leading, which is what you're describing, I think. And I wonder from your perspective, like, what is your desire to quantify more the benefits of this approach, and do you feel that's achievable as a CPO in today's world?
I mean, I'd hope so. I think there are metrics you can look at. So I think reduced absenteeism, there's a financial metric you could apply to that. I don't quite know how I'd measure increased productivity, but we can certainly measure employee satisfaction, as I said, and client satisfaction. I mean, I guess lower healthcare cost is an interesting one, because actually what I realised, and it was when I first met you, I dug in actually to our EAP program and what we were doing, and we actually our healthcare costs have gone up, particularly in the US, which is our largest market. We spend a large amount of money ensuring that people have access to the right medical care. And they've gone up for a couple of reasons, but one of them is because actually the rise in the need for mental well-being asks have gone up. So the good news is they've gone up because people feel comfortable asking for help. So I don't know that I want a lower healthcare cost. So the challenge is there may be a higher one, because of course when you introduce that level of healthcare, it tends to be an ongoing. It's not like you're fixing a broken arm. Yeah. It can take longer and it might require different. So that one might be a challenge to the bottom line, but you would think improve retention. And we know that acquisition is much harder than retention. So there will be a series of metrics that might mean you could you could ladder it up. And I would think reputationally it would be super helpful. I mean, I think a challenge for us, just being really honest right now, is we have done 2 kind of mega mergers and then a program called Synergy across our media business. So we're losing people through efficiency. So I think we need to get through that tough time, because you also you need to be mindful that you're not looking superficial when you're talking about caring for people and investing in them, when we also, unfortunately, are having to make some people redundant and losing some of the workforce. So I think if we can get through this, we've promised the city and the street no more restructuring costs, no more mergers. So we have to be through it, as we have to be right-sizing the business to get the business back to health. And then I think we can probably focus, because I worry right now that we might look a bit disingenuous. But I would hope next year, we always know it. There's a bit of time it takes, from our All In, which is our employee survey. After a merger, there's always, the results always dip down, but then they tend to come back up, because it's a stressful time, right? You're losing some of your colleagues, and change is stressful.
And there's something very interesting there, isn't there, about the duality of the situation, which is, on the one hand, a business is a business and actually has its own, a business has goals, financial goals, performance goals. And within that business, the most valuable asset, as is always said, is a human being. So the most important thing is a human being, or aspect is a human being. And the human being is a human being's a relationship people, and trust is really important. So you have these kind of like very human concepts that are trying to sit within businesses, which are not natural bedfellows sometimes. And that can make, that's what I think is interesting about these notions of trust and knowing people and friendship and transparency, authenticity, and how they sit naturally against KPIs. There's a tension there that can be difficult to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I read something interesting in an article. I read all the time, so sometimes just short articles in the spirit of trying to always get better. It was just this morning, and I think, many years ago, I remember talking about the balance, or not the balance, but the need for EQ and IQ. So those 2 things. And in the past, obviously, leaders would definitely have strong IQ, and particularly, I would say, within WPP, particularly in media, there was a lot of IQ. There was a lot of owning the P&L, stamping their fist, commander control, those kind of behaviors. But actually that need for more EQ definitely came in. And then I discovered there was a 3rd Q, which I was unaware of, because this article was about the 4th Q. I was like, I didn't even know there was 3. The 3rd Q apparently is the LQ, which is the learning quotient, which I guess to me is a trait that we need in all our colleagues, which is curiosity. So learning, the capacity for learning, the desire for growth. Some of that can be self-starting or just your mind. We might use one of our values of being open, I think would be the closest. But I think LQ, okay, that's great. And then the new one was a high trust quotient, so TQ. And that trust really is the foundation of all effective relationships. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And I think sometimes maybe for CEOs or execs that might worry about terms like psychological safety and even inclusion, because they kind of go, God, what does it mean? Is it overwhelming? Is it all this stuff that's not related to the business? I think that's the fear, right? That we're doing all this stuff because it's a nice thing to do and it's putting it back to the business. But I think if they phrasing it in the word trust, like an environment that you trust, in a culture that you trust, is going to help you deliver, that might help. I'm thinking aloud, as you can tell, but I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. It made me think of another question. Do you think one of the roles, because I think the CHRO, Chief People Officer, being at the exec is critical and obviously relatively new in the history of business, but do you think that one of the roles is to bring that more human perspective, or to put the employee first, and to help the perhaps exec team that maybe isn't so EQ orientated to understand the importance of that?
Yes. And I think boards really do feel that, and they push on that. And I think, good on my CEO for, with Jen, my predecessor, having, so on our board, 2 execs, so the CFO, CEO, but having at every board meeting general counsel, probably for different reasons, but actually then bringing the CPO, so they're always there to provide a lens or a different perspective. I have to stop myself from talking too much, obviously, but I always present at every board meeting. I sometimes have special things to present. So we did that just recently on succession, then a session on Black leadership in the US. So lots of good opportunities. They always ask, what's the temperature? How are people feeling? And then because we're FTSE listed, you probably know we have to have a workforce advisory board. So actually that one of our non-execs attends. So we have to have our employees engaged in a way so that one of our non-execs directly hears the feedback from employees. And that's only statutory in the UK, but we have just re-energized that workforce advisory board with one of my colleagues. And it's a great group of people, diverse set of people. Cindy Rose, one of our non-execs, attends that. And actually, we've done the same thing in India because it's just a really important market. And we've just rebooted it in the US, which is our largest market. And actually, it's quite interesting to see the differences between those groups across those. The UK, I would say, is the middle ground. They are ambitious, curious, broadly sort of happy, but have questions and some challenges. US, quite anxious, as you'd imagine, where you're there now. I just think in general, people aren't back in the office as much, which I think does have an impact. I think the nervousness around the election just remains. And so I think that's quite a challenge situation. And in India, when you go to India, I'm sure you go to India, is always like the happiest place and our most ambitious and delightful and highly energized colleagues. So it's quite interesting to see the different perspectives, actually. But the board are very interested in how people are. And actually, Cindy's been on non-exec looking at that for a number of years. And she's excellent. They lean in. They always ask.
One of the things that I think is interesting about that global piece, and we've not spent much time talking about this, but it is how very different the topic of, how different the expectations around employment are, how very different the expectations around work-life balance, for want of a better term, are, how mental health is talked about. I think a lot of the time people say, the US is very advanced with mental health, but I actually think that it's a very reactive landscape, broadly speaking, and thinks very clinically a lot of the time, to psychiatrically driven a lot of the time. I think in Europe, there's probably still a fair amount of stigma around getting therapy, etc. So there's some work to do there, but it's quite a holistic culture in Europe around mental health, and understanding the systemic issues that impact on a human being. And I think that's partly due to the way that the healthcare systems are disincentivized to spend money versus the US, where they're incentivized to spend money. And then in India, what I think is very interesting is the stigma is, I was there recently, actually. I think the stigma is a real blocker still to people being able to talk about it. And whilst I think the world has moved forwards and an awful lot, and India's moved forward an awful lot on the topic, and there are, of course, like many, many cultures within India, and within global organizations, there are acculturalized people, etc. But nonetheless, I think there is a barrier to mental health being spoken about and acknowledged. And I think that very interesting you mentioned about the happy piece, because I think that my experience is that people say, no, I'll talk about mental health and we're fine, we're really good, and there's no issues. But it's really hard actually to get anyone to acknowledge any sort of issue or any sort of problem, because the stigma is very high. And that's a whole nother topic, which is fascinating when you're thinking about building global wellbeing strategies.
Yeah, no, I think you have to take on, and that's where I know well-being is different to D&I, but there are links between feeling included and I think mental well-being, for sure. Is we did at one stage have a global inclusion council that I sat on. It's fairly pointless, other than a few broad principles of, being human, empathetic, and inclusive. You then have to really do it at country by country level. So that's what we have now, because what it means in India versus China versus Australia, entirely different. So yeah, you've got to localize it. You can't, there's no one size.
Yeah, there's no one size. Australia, I think, is incredibly progressive in lots of ways around this topic and very inspirational. And can I ask you, before we're coming up to time, but I'd love to get your sense on the future of work and what you're thinking about for WPP, but also what you think the future of a chief people officer is in the world of work in the next few years, and There's obviously a lot to talk about AI, etc. Like, how are you feeling about the future, and what do you think is coming?
Gosh, I think we've managed to not. I'll have to talk about AI now. I think we only
You've got to
mentioned it
sneak it in.
once. So
Yeah, we have to talk about AI.
It's a record. No, but I guess more seriously, that is a huge focus for us. One, in developing our own AI platform, which is a platform called Open, that will enable us across geography and across discipline to connect all the different work streams, which is what our largest clients need us to do. So very practical, big scale work going on now. And thank God we bought we were lucky enough to buy an AI company 2.5 years ago called Satalia, who are amazing, who are doing a lot of that work for us and creating brand brains and performance brains, so amazing client-facing products, which is all very exciting. But actually what we've got to do is shift the majority of that 115,000 workforce into understanding how they can work with AI, how that will augment their role, how it will make their role more efficient, and how it will replace parts of their role or all of their role eventually, and how we need to therefore reskill them. And I think so we've been doing, sort of trying to understand levels of engagement and excitement, and we did a survey amongst some of our creative team and our production teams around the world. And the creatives are off the charts, enthusiastic, optimistic, and using as many AI tools as possible within our environment. And our production are pretty optimistic, and they quite like it, but more dampened because, of course, they have more of a fear that part of what they will do, because it's more systemic, I guess, or more practical level, there's more that Gen I can do to replace some of the production process, probably slightly more fearful. So we are trying to understand how we can help on that journey and how we can educate and develop people so that they understand. And, I love at times, although he's controversial at times, Professor Scott Galloway, he always say, and I'll use the quote often, AI won't replace you, but someone that knows how to use AI will. So it's our job, it's incumbent on me to make sure the whole of our workforce understands how generative AI will help them either do their core skill, their media production, creative, PR, commerce skill, or how it helps someone interviewing pull together resumes, sense check it against a profile, pull in other data and do an interview sheet for them. I mean, you can do that super quick using our tools. So that's massive. One, so there's the reskilling, upskilling and reskilling, I think is really important. And then there's actually the overall shape of the workforce. So if we're classically a triangle in media, but an hourglass in PR, what are those shapes going to look like in the future? And actually, probably we still need junior people coming in. It might be the middle level that gets squeezed, but how do the middles then become the trusted advisor at the senior level of the organization if they haven't been at the middle? So there's quite a lot of things to work out. And it's not, so I think there's never been a more interesting or exciting time to understand the shape and the impact of the workforce. And I guess we're bullish right now. So when we did our Capital Markets Day, we're estimating still the same number of people as a base case, because we will reskill, train, and find new jobs for our colleagues. And actually what we should be doing is expanding our addressable market with the jobs that we will do, because we are nothing if not inventive and creative. So keeping those levels of optimism is really important to us, but then upskilling people, because that's the one thing that they really need and wish to do better. So I think that's crucial. And then I think the other thing, which I alluded to when I joked about my age, because every so often I get it wrong and call myself a Gen Z, which clearly I'm not, I'm a Gen X. Thinking about Gen Zs and Gen Alpha is just really understanding that how they want to show up to work and what they want to get out of work is very different to you or I, Nick. And neither one is good or bad, but I sort of joke that, I'm the idiot working every hour God sends, or thinking it's normal at the weekend to take a call or to do some stuff or travel on. To me, that's just normal. And that's how I succeed and thrive in my job, because I love my job. But, there are a lot of people who definitely want to finish at 5 and find it odd that we would expect or ask them to do a bit more work than that. And when we think about mobility and moving people around our organisation and tenure, I've been at WPP now 14 years. There are some people who have been there longer, but I think the tenures are getting shorter. So we're going to have to get our head around more project-based work, And I think that's going to be a big shift. And it's quite a challenge to the infrastructure or the way that we're set up or how we charge out people as well. So I think that a huge generational attitudinal shift, which I think COVID accelerated to some degree. And I think the mental health, mental wellness challenge also is a contributing factor to that. It just means the expectations or the demands of work are very different and fascinating.
It really is fascinating. Hearing you talk about the intergenerational piece reminds me of what you were talking about earlier, which is that really important of knowing and of listening and of trust. And there needs to be that intergenerational listening and intergenerational trust and knowing. Those are so important, because you're right, it's not right or wrong. It's about, evolution and how do we evolve together. And then as you were talking about AI, I just loved the humanity that was coming through in it. This idea that actually what AI can do is perhaps allow us to be more human. Perhaps it will take away some tasks that otherwise were overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And give us more time. And peak performance is operating at 80%, not at 120%. So perhaps giving people that ability to get some time back for themselves, which will allow that humanity to come through again, which I find really inspiring. In the field of mental health care and healthcare more broadly, I think AI has an incredibly important role in helping to ensure people get the right care at the right time in a way that speaks their language, culturally is appropriate, and is affordable to be delivered as well. So I think the utility of AI within healthcare is incredibly important and exciting, but that humanity can be accentuated through AI in the workplace. And I love that idea. Lindsay, I could talk to you all day, but I know you have a barbecue waiting this evening. Thank you so much for your time and your insights and wisdom, and for coming and showing up in such a human way today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you for listening to Lead From Within, brought to you by Unmind. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a like and please do review if you found it valuable. Follow Unmind on LinkedIn for updates on all things regarding leadership, performance, and well-being. To find out more about Unmind's workplace well-being solutions for enterprise businesses, please go to unmind.com. That's unmind.com. Thank you and see you next time.